So today we're going to look at the Dark Magician deck, and a lot of new players will think that this is the best deck in the format, and it is not because there are a lot of decks that have counters to what this deck is trying to do, and we will kind of talk about that as we go on. But basically the whole idea of this deck is to use Dark Magical Circle and grab whatever you're missing, and then activate Navigation during your opponent's turn, to be able to summon your Dark Magicians, and also trigger the effect of Dark Magical Circle to be able to banish a card your opponent controls. And on your next turn, after the turn the trap is sent to the graveyard, you can use this as a spell trap negate by banishing itself from the graveyard, which really limits your opponent's potential to build a follow-up, especially if they are playing a deck that relies heavily on a spell to do their combos, like the Neos deck, or like even Cyber Dragons, which need their fusion spells to resolve. There are some really big weaknesses of the deck, namely that it really relies on Dark Magical Circle sticking on the field. Otherwise, the biggest upside of your deck is just gone. And most decks in the game have some amount of MSTs or Cosmic Cyclones in them, and if they draw any of those, doesn't really matter if they go first or second, they will have an out to your Dark Magical Circle, which not only stops you from banishing, it also stops you from being able to search with the activation effect. And that is a really big choke point of the deck. And if you don't hard draw navigation in your opening hand, the deck is also pretty slow, because the main way that you're summoning your Dark Magicians is with this trap card, and it is a trap card, which means you have to wait a turn after it is set to be able to activate it. And the skill which allows you to activate a trap card is it's set only triggers when you draw the trap card as part of your opening hand. So if you don't have it and you search it later on with Magician's Rod, you won't be able to use the skill to set it and then activate it the turn that it is set, which makes the whole process pretty slow if you go second. So to kind of combat this weakness, we have a lot of back row removal. So triple MST, double Cosmic Cyclone is the non-engine that I decide to play using the grades that I have for the deck. And the reason why I think having back row removal is good in this deck is because if you go second, your opponent has some amount of set cards in their back row. You want to get rid of them before you activate your Dark Magical Circle, because if they have a set MST or Cosmic Cyclone, they will be able to counter your Dark Magical Circle. So having multiple back row removal just helps you get rid of those back row removal before you commit to your Dark Magical Circle and actually get back into the game. And also, if you play back row like Book of Moon or Fiendish Chain or Raigeki Break or whatever, you run into the risk of not having enough zones in your back row, because those cards are primarily good as interruptions by having them set on turn 1. But because Dark Magical Circle and Magician's Navigation both use a spell and trap zone, you won't have a lot of zones left for a kind of heavy back row strategy. So if we play cards like back row removal instead, we can just keep them in our hand and then just activate them to get rid of our opponent's back row if we need to. So other than that, the changes I've made to the deck are we removed a copy of Dark Magic Expanded, because this card is just not very good. It's win more, doesn't help you get into your combo. All it does is boost your monster's attack, which is, I guess, it fixes another weakness of the deck, which is that your monsters don't have a lot of attack. But in a situation where you get to a Dark Magician and you have a way to search this card, you are already winning the game, and you can kind of solve the issue of not having enough attack by having the banish for Dark Magical Circle, or using Ebon Illusion Magician to banish cards when you attack with your Dark Magicians. And other than that, we removed the 2 copies of Offerings to the Doomed because of the reasons that I talked about, not having enough zones in the back row. But other than that, you can consider playing the Eye of Timaeus, because it is an upgrade for the deck. You can use this to turn your Dark Magicians into a strong fusion monster. But again, this card is a win more card. You need to have a Dark Magician on your field to be able to activate this card, and in a situation where you have Dark Magician on your field, you are already winning the game. And this card also is not searchable because even though it says Dark Magician, it says Dark Magician Monster, and that is different from a card that mentions Dark Magician. It is just weird like that. It's kind of like mentioning Dark Magician and Dark Magician Monster are two different types of effects. So that's why if you are confused why Magician's Rod can't search your Tamayas, that's the reason. So that's why we're not playing it. And other than that, the deck is pretty much exactly the same. Not too much to talk about for that. Let's have a look at some replays. Okay, in our first replay, we're playing against Yuma and Astral, which is the Automat deck. This is one of the bad matchups that we have because they have a way to force out our navigation early by having the spell card that pops our back row. But if we use our banishes in the correct way, we can still win, and that is more so if our opponent plays poorly. So our opponent is going to reveal the spell that I talked about, the spell that pops our back row. So what they can do is normal summon a guy and immediately activate the spell to try to pop our magical circle. And that will basically force us to immediately use the navigation on their normal summon before they activate the spell. Otherwise, we won't be able to banish with the Dark Magical Circle. So another way to actually trigger the circle during our opponent's turn is to use a spell and then use the Magician of Dark Illusion from my hand, so this allows us to trigger the effect without needing to activate navigation. So because they activated that and they did not have a Gaga monster in the graveyard, they can't extend, and then they will just scoop right here. Okay, so we are going second against a Jaden deck. We are going to need to basically hard draw navigation to have a chance, which we do. So our opponent will activate Neo's Fusion and just summon a guy, set a bunch of cards and pass. We have one back row removal, so we're just gonna have to hope that it hits a back row removal, which we do. So during our main phase, the skill will trigger, we'll set the trap card, and we can activate Dark Magical Circle without having to worry about our opponent destroying it. So we'll add a second nav, we'll activate the nav. They have a second MST, which kinda sucks, but that is still okay because it is our own turn, which means we can use 2 level 7s to make a copy of Ebon Illusion Magician, and that will still be able to let us banish their monster. And even if he negates the attack, we will still get the banish because it is on attack declaration, and it will trigger as soon as our monster declares an attack. So even if the attack is negated, we still get the banish. So we'll set a whole bunch of cards, and even if our opponent top decks Neo's Fusion, it doesn't really matter, and they know this, and that's because we have the navigation in the graveyard, and that will let us negate a spell trap effect. So knowing that, he won't even bother activating the spell card, and he's just gonna let us beat him with the monsters that we have on the field. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.